Hi everyone, my name's Simon and welcome to Insert Past Upon here. It's another interview today, and today it is with a horror reviewer, a science fiction reviewer, and a mixed master general. That's right, it's Abysmii. As always, the stories we discuss are linked in the description, so before we even begin, I suggest you click through those and have a read through. I'll warn you when we're going to start discussing them, so if you really want to listen to us to the intro beforehand, feel free, feel free. Otherwise, sit back, relax, grab yourself a glass of something, and listen to me and Abysmii talking about creepypasta. Okay, so hi there. It's Simon here for Insert Pasta Pun here, and today I'm with Abysmii. Say hi, Abysmii.
Hello, everyone.
You like that? So yeah, as I said before, thanks a lot for taking time out to speak to me. It's always appreciated.
Of
Um,
course.
so yeah, so to start off with then, tell me a bit about yourself then. Like for people who don't know you, who are you?
If anyone is familiar with Undercooked Analysis, I did a spin-off show called Ray Gun Readers, which is essentially the same thing, just with internet science fiction. I run another ripoff that is basically the same thing as Undercooked Analysis with some friends and Too Spooky. I used to be a creepypasta narrator a couple years ago, so I've had, as far as creepypasta goes, and just online horror fiction in general, I've been around for about a few years now.
You've been through the
Uh,
ringer a few times.
no, that's an understatement. And what else? I've made music for a lot of people in the creepypasta community and for other various projects. That's probably my main focus, and then my other focus is literature.
Awesome, awesome. So how long have you sort of been writing for? Like, do you, I mean, yeah, I mean, I know you've got a few of your own bits and bobs out there. Like, how long have you been writing yourself?
Yeah, gosh, for technically a very long time. I used to do a lot of poetry when I was in primary school. Um, and then I kind of fell away. And when I got my master's at Uni of St. Andrews actually, and that was just a lot of essay writing for a very long time, and not a lot of time for creative writing. And then when I graduated, I guess maybe 2 years ago, when I found out online horror fiction was exploding, I said, "Oh, that's very interesting. I'd love to get back into writing." So yeah, ever since then, I've been writing the odd story here and there. Usually, I don't write too much. I usually write if something happens to me and it's instant great inspiration, or if there's a good writing contest around that really helps me actually write something. So yeah, I mean, pretty much my entire life in one form or another. But as far as creative writing goes, probably it's really kicked up the past couple years.
Nice. That's cool. So, like, what sort of stuff do you like to write the most? Do you prefer writing horror, or do you write any science fiction or anything like that?
I haven't. I'm working on some science fiction now, but I haven't written it because science fiction is very, at least the stuff I like to read is very kind of high concept and very long form, and I am terrible at writing long form. I still haven't
Yeah,
worked
yeah,
up to
yeah.
that. So, like I said, my background's more in poetry. So, right now, I guess I'm writing horror fiction because it's often easier to do in a short format. A lot of flash fiction, macropasta, stuff like that. It's kind of helping me. It's something I can do, and I can do relatively frequently.
Mm.
So that's what I'm doing right now. If I do have the time, I would like to try writing a longer form science fiction story up the road, but we'll see what happens.
That's, I suppose, with science fiction, like world building is king, and
Yes,
you've got to take a
yes,
lot of
it
time on
is.
it.
Well, we say this, but there's a Reddit I follow on. It's a subreddit called Short Sci-Fi Stories, where I get a lot of the material to for Reagan readers. So you can do it. It's just very hard. And
Yeah.
if I were to write science fiction, it would be longer form because I'm just not as good as those authors yet.
No, that's fair enough. So, I mean, in terms of horror, then, what sort of style of horror do you like to write the most?
Well, I guess you can narrow it down to two. I am a huge Lovecraft fan, have been for a while now,
Mm.
and a lot of the early stuff I wrote is very Lovecraft influenced. It's very there's something beyond our understanding that's causing life to be bleak and dismal and scary. Without giving too much away, of actually having a monster. That's I kind of prefer that. I prefer to write stories where characters undergo some dramatic and often tragic experience. I am also a student of the Ashcan Horror School by Dead Palette, which I'm sure everyone's already mentioned here, which
It's
is, of
cropped up a
course,
couple of times, yeah.
it's that is kind of realist horror fiction. So I like to kind of alternate between just the very strong realism of horrors that happen in everyday life, and then the slightly more, I guess, Kafka-esque, surreal horror of kind of Lovecraft and more modern existential writers, I guess. So kind of I alternate between those two.
Nice, nice. That's cool. So, I know you mentioned Dead Palette there, and you mentioned sort of Lovecraft. I mean, who would you say you sort of draw your inspirations from for the most part?
For the most part, I would say it's still probably Lovecraft, and not just him, but just kind of that school of thought, because he was very open with his works. He invited his friends to build upon his kind of loose mythologies and such, and just because so much of his stuff is I think all of it's in the public domain now. People kind of draw influence from that, and it's nice to just build upon. It's this kind of unspoken thing where, oh, it's Lovecraft, let's all work on this together and expand the universe, because it was loose to begin with, so it can never be. No one can really claim it as theirs, but everyone can make a lot of really good fiction out of it, which is
Nice.
great.
And is that what kind of
Yeah.
draws you to it? Is that just the sort of
Yeah,
the fact that you can add to it, and it's still never wrong.
definitely. Definitely. It's a very good template to build off on, and you can set it in any time period. You can set it with like any type of character you want. You can make it as like, oh god, there's Cthulhu, as much as you want, or you can just make it like so vague what is, who the antagonist is, but still have it be cosmic horror or eldritch horror, whatever you want to call it. So it's a very loose template, but it's a very inspiring template, and there's a lot to build off of if you want to do it, and that's very useful.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I've only just started getting into Lovecraft properly. I mean, I've always obviously known of him, and sort of like
Yeah.
obviously Cthulhu's the poster boy, but but insofar as you can have a poster boy for Lovecraft, but yeah, it's only recently when I've actually started reading some of his other stuff. I'm like, actually, there's so much more to this than just elder
Hmm.
gods.
Yeah.
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 So it's I obviously recommend that to people to get into if they haven't already. So, speaking of the stuff that's given you inspiration, we might as well move on to sort of the story you sent over. Now, the one you sent over to me was Black Rice. Is that I'm getting the name right? Yeah, Black Rice.
Yes.
Which was I really enjoyed and was a lot different to the sort of creepypasta that I normally read. So, obviously, what I'll do is I'll post the link to it in the description of the video. So, obviously, anyone listening, highly recommend you read this first, so we can get as spoilery as we want. And so give sort of like a basic overview of the story, then, sort of.
So the story this was one that was inspired by true events, and this was kind of early on when the Ashcan School from Dead Pellet was established. So I said, hey, this is a real thing that happened. I wonder if I can give this the Ashcan treatment, just kind of as an exercise. And it's a realist story. You'd be hard pressed to find anything supernatural in there. I guess there's a slight nod, but basically, it is. Are we in spoiler territory? Can we just like hop
Yeah,
into
no,
that?
go crazy. As I say, I mean, people have been warned. People have been warned. I think it's on them now.
All right. Well, so it is a story with. I think the central theme is superstition, and it is based off of what happened to me at work once. One day, I was going out to lunch, and my coworkers said, "Someone rice behind someone's car." And I said, "That's nice. Why are you telling me this?" Because that's a very kind of banal, mundane thing to
Yeah.
happen. And he said, "Well, someone else said that that's a curse." And I said, "Well, who? And like, did they do it?" "No." "Okay, so how do you know this is a curse?" "Well, in certain cultures, that's like a way to curse somebody." And so the office kind of ran with it, and everyone was trying to look up what this was, and then they're playing pranks on each other by dumping rice in random locations, and it was ridiculous, and it got way out of control of just people like freaking out about it and other people just taking the piss, and it was wonderful. And I remember after all this, just thinking to myself, there's this variety of people who I think half believe in this, a lot of people who don't. But what struck me the most is the fact that no one knew exactly what happened. No one knew, but everyone like jumped to these enormous conclusions, and that was very powerful. So I said to myself, I could write a story where basically superstition takes hold. And that alone is not very scary to me. So I said, okay, how can I? Where's the horror in this? Where's the whiplash? So the way the story is set up is basically similar events happen. Rice is found. I made the rice black because that's dark or something, and um,
The gothier the
basically had
better.
yeah, essentially. And I looked up black rice to make sure that was actually a thing before I started making up food. So there is black rice. So basically, the similar events happen. The office gets a bit superstitious about this, and then when things are starting to wind down, at least from our protagonists and our narrator's perspective, there is an altercation outside between two people who are not part of the office. They're brand new to the scene, and they're having a fight, and then someone gets shot. And it's revealed through kind of an aftermath of information that the one person had hit another person's kid with their car, and the grieving parent wanted closure, or just wanted something. And when they confronted them outside the office, and they were yelling, and then violence happens, and someone dies, and that's it. And everyone inside the office looks at this and just like kind of drops everything, because whatever they thought about the black rice, whatever their beliefs were, it kind of didn't matter. And it was completely just blindsided by the fact that, oh, someone's just died. And that's, for me, I guess it was just me kind of exploring superstition and how it affects different people, how different people view it, but how it's a very human thing, no matter your stance on superstition. Humans love ritual of any shape and size, and our minds very much like to leap to the most silly conclusions when we can't explain something.
Mm.
So I was just kind of doing kind of a little bit of a thought exercise on that, and a little bit of a character piece on how everyone reacts to it. But I liked the idea of just there being this horrific event that kind of puts everyone back into perspective, and everyone goes back to square one. One thing I'm proud of in that story is the man, basically a man gets shot, and he bleeds out slowly because he's been shot in the stomach
Yeah.
by the grieving mother, and the mother gets carried off by the police because the paramedics couldn't make it in time to save him. But like, she's not being hauled away. She's sobbing. She's very sad. She's sorry. She realizes what she's done, but she's a grieving parent, and sometimes people act irrationally when tragedy befalls them. So it's this very sad scene, and the last image you have is the man who died. When he got shot, he fell over and his head's resting in the black rice, as if to give it, you can kind of say, oh, that's a supernatural thing, or it's just a coincidence, or whatever you want to interpret it as. And I wanted to leave that for the reader to decide for themselves, what the answer is to the story.
Yeah.
There really isn't one. But I tried to make it firm enough that you can make a conclusion, but that there can be multiple interpretations. And that's basically the story in a nutshell.
No, it's because that was one of the things I was going to say, and one of the things I sort of particularly enjoyed about it is the fact that the almost supernatural element almost takes a back seat to all the stuff that's surrounding it, which is something that I found actually quite refreshing. So a lot of creepypasta is always going to be sort of like stuff building up to this big scare at the end that's and this
Yeah.
sort of like this completely crazy thing that's happened. Whereas you manage to sort of hold it back enough to sort of be like, well, this you never really confirm is it supernatural. It just could or couldn't be. And as you say, the fact that people are left to draw their own conclusions from it, I found very interesting from it. So, I mean, in terms of writing the story, I mean, where did you just? I know you said sort of it was sort of partially based on something that happened in your office. But I mean, where did you start with the story? Did you have the end in mind first, or did you just sort of that
I
sort of
did
come about
not.
organically?
No, I did not have the end in mind. I typically, when I get inspired by real life events, I like start writing it, just get an outline down as fast as possible, or I will forget everything.
Yeah,
So, and often that's just like notes on my phone. So I recorded that idea, and I went home, and then I started writing it. And I was thinking to myself, okay, how where's the scare? What makes this scary? It's interesting to me, but this won't frighten a general audience. So I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, I could have something happen to all the office workers, but that's almost too easy, and I don't know exactly how I would resolve it because in my mind, the fact that the rice is there is just completely coincidental to these people's lives.
Yeah.
It's something that they notice, and then they obsess over it, and in the end, it's just a meaningless pile of grains. So I said, okay, well, what if something happens to someone else, but they're there to witness it? And then eventually I just kind of molded over in my head, oh, maybe someone gets in a fight, or oh, someone just dies. And yeah, I refined it over maybe another day or so, and that's just how it came about. I don't typically write long stories. They're very concise, and I try to make them punchy because again, I'm not very good at long form writing yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's cool. That's cool. So, I mean, would you say sort of the thing that was going to happen in the end was that a sort of bit of a block for you? Sort of like what? I mean, how did you sort of overcome that? Like, what is it that made you settle on the way you did do it?
What I often tend to do is I try really hard to ask myself honestly what scares me, and more specifically for this story, what would scare me in this situation? And the superstition doesn't scare me. So, what is scary? Well, getting shot. That's a pretty frightening thing. So I kind of just ran down my list of what would really upset the common 9 to 5 office workers environment, and um, yeah, shootings are pretty damn scary and tragic.
Yeah.
So I settled on that and went, okay, yeah, no, that'll do it. That'll basically I don't know what the literary term for it is, but it's just a point where all the characters stop what they're doing and all character development stops immediately. And it completely overwhelms both the story and the reader because they're left with, oh my God, this just happened. It's a very kind of like whiplash escalation. And then there's a very sharp coming down after that, and then both the characters and the readers are allowed to kind of collect their thoughts and process what's happened. And so that's kind of where I came from it.
Nice, yeah, because I know at the end you sort of say that the main character sort of keeps some rice on his desk from then on. So sort of it really sort of gets across the sort of idea that it's something that's going to sort of permanently affect the people in that place, especially.
Yes.
I mean, especially when you talk about office work. I know I don't know about where you are, but I mean, for us, we're pretty much like, well, we're working here, we're already cursed. So
Yes.
so it's sort of, it's the way sort of building up to something like that would actually affect people in that position. So that, people ignore an awful lot in their daily lives, I think, and I really enjoyed how you sort of managed to really have something convincing, I suppose, and real that would break through that.
I'm glad it got communicated. I there's there's a saying that says time heals all wounds, which to me is just like one of the biggest fallacies that everyone's accepted.
Yeah.
Because trauma, like real trauma, sticks with people. You never get over it. You're never completely healed. You learn to deal with it, and you don't have to let it control you. But it will never go away. When I was, I think it was my first or second year at uni, I was driving my friend home early in the morning after we were just hanging out, and a drunk driver sped around a blind corner and hit us, and rolled our car, and we hit a retaining wall, which is good because if we hadn't hit that wall, we would have hit a house. And we were fine. There was no bones broken. I had some glass in my feet, but we got that taken care of. But that was incredibly scary for me.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I still have to drive that road whenever I go home to visit my parents. So whenever I drive that road, like I get a little bit of a tinge of, bad experience here. And that's never going to go away. And that's, for me, that's very cool because I like to express lasting damage on characters and how they deal with it, if they can deal with it, because a lot of people can't. And for me, that's a very relatable human fear that a lot of people can relate to, even if they haven't had anything particularly tragic happen to them. they can somewhat sympathize. So I try to tap into that whenever I can.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense to me at least. So, I mean, with this story, I mean, unless it was one you wrote back in February, is it, or did you write it before then, or?
I
I mean,
think it's February.
that's
Yeah,
it. I mean, that's when it was posted on Too Spooky, so I'm taking a guess.
yeah.
So, I mean, looking back on it now, is there anything you'd change about it, or are you happy with it as it is, or?
Yeah, no, I'm happy with it. It's very self-contained. I wouldn't want to build on it. I wouldn't want to really change anything. Um, that's what I'm quite happy with, which is why I sent it over to you. It's probably one of my more solid pieces of work.
Nice. Well, so I definitely enjoyed it, and as I say, for anyone, if you haven't, well, aside from that, that it's completely spoiled for you now. But but if they, but I'd say check it out. I'd say the links in the description. It's well worth a read. So as I say, and as I normally do, as I said, the second story we're going to talk about is one by someone else, and this one is The Chanting in the Woods, which I absolutely love. This creepypasta. This is one of my favourites as well, and. And yeah, so we could again link in the comments, spoilers, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think what is it that appeals to you about this story then?
Atmosphere. One thing I'm not especially great at is atmosphere, and I would like to get better at that. That's something Lovecraft is the king at, and that's something this story does unbelievably well. Is the scares don't really like it may scare some people what happens in the story. The more violent portions, the more not really supernatural. That's kind of up to debate, but just there's so much tension and suspense that is built up to the way this is written, and I like this author's work a lot. He had a pen name, and then I think he reverted to something else because it's not credited on the wiki. But I do know him, not really in person, but his name is Axeman. He does horror cartoons actually on YouTube.
Oh yeah,
He writes in his spare time, and for the longest time I didn't know he wrote this, and just like when I first read this, it was incredible. But yeah, basically, he has a very, very impressive way of writing atmosphere, and he can write long form, which I really admire.
yeah.
And just when you read this story, it's longer than most creepypastas, but good lord, does it not feel that way? It's just you're sucked into every scene and what's happening to the protagonist and the events around him, and it's I don't know, it's just so satisfying to read. It's hard to, without giving too many spoilers, it's very much worth it.
Well, yeah, no, I know what you mean. 'Cause, again, I remember when I read it the first time, like it really reminded me of Pen Pal, and I seem to have managed to relate everything I like back to Pen Pal. But
Well, pen pal's good. I mean, can't blame you.
well, that's it, and it's the sort because it's another one of those stories of a child being sort of caught up in stuff that they don't quite understand, and
Yeah.
just and sort of dealing with that. And as you say, well, as we were saying in the last story, the sort of the lasting damage that can almost come from that. So I mean, in terms of like comparing it to sort of other pastas, I mean, it's what is it? Is it just the atmosphere that really pushes it over the top for you?
Yeah, I mean that's the most impressive thing because the conceit is about the goatmen thing in the forest, and like people have done that. It's a very old story, which isn't a bad thing, but what unlike other goatman stories, this one just the way the goatmen are used is very sparingly, and you don't even know if there is one. You just know there's this weird Blair Witch style thing out in the woods, and it's occasionally creeping into this kid's life and fucking with him. Just straight messing with
Yeah,
him in these horrible, horrible ways. And of course, he's a kid, so all the adults around him don't believe him or don't know how to handle it, and that's very scary because you know everyone's been a kid, everyone knows how it feels to have things outside of your control, and even times when adults can't help you, and that's the scariest of all, when you just don't know, no one has your back, no one can help you. So helplessness is also a very big part of this story, and I just loved the fact that you know the author's using this maybe supernatural, maybe just crazy people element either way, it's frightening because you never quite know when it's going to come back. It's not something that this kid can defeat. It's not something anyone can handle. But how do you deal with that? How do you deal with something that you can't control affecting you in such a way? And again, that's a very basic, primal, and relatable fear that I think anybody, if they give the story a chance, can relate to. Because again, it's not there's some mini climaxes in here as far as action, but so much of it is just this kind of slow burn of, my life is falling apart and I don't know what to do, and that's just so awesome how it's written.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it's also like how so much of the action in the story almost takes part in inside the own protagonist's head almost,
Hmm.
and also the whole. I mean, this is again why I tend to like stories that are done like this, especially when it's sort of like this is something that happened to me as a kid. Is the fact that because they were a kid at the time, it almost makes has a bit of like unreliable narrator playing into
Oh
it, of sort of
yes.
like
Oh
playing.
yes.
So I mean, in terms of in terms of that, then I mean, for you, what scared you when you were a kid?
Oh, what scared me when I was a kid? People. I was very, not really agoraphobic or anything, but I was super, super introverted. Still am an introvert, but it's just I had very little confidence in myself. I had very little, I guess, identity. So I didn't know how to relate to people. I didn't have a lot of friends, and when I did, like they'd go away after school or something. So just being in social situations really frightened me. And you can see this in this story too. This kid doesn't really have any friends. He has his parents who are getting divorced or whatever, and then like these other people who are just messing with him. And that really, I think, tapped into a childhood fear of mine of just like, I don't know how to deal with this social situation.
Yeah,
Please make it stop. I mean, I had a lot of I think I have a fear of heights. So that was another fear. But yeah, just I think that fear of social situations is probably the strongest connection here.
yeah, I know what I mean. I mean, for me, it's always kind of like because I'm a child. I'm a child of divorce. But yeah, like it's that whole thing of when adults are dealing with adult problems. The idea that that as a child your problems don't matter, almost,
Yes, yes.
and the sort of helplessness that
I
goes with
too am
that.
actually a child of divorce, so and that didn't really affect me too much, which is weird. Maybe just I've learned to deal with it, maybe. But I definitely, even though it didn't scare me or have much of an emotional impact, I was just kind of nodding my head the entire time and going, "Yep, no, that's how it is."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. This is something I don't understand, so let's go with that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so I mean, going back to this story, then I mean, in terms of sort of the writing style and things, I mean, does this writer sort of influence how you write your stories, sort of since you've written that, or
I would say in probably a small way, and that being knowing when to use restraint and knowing how to, eff- excuse me, effectively use your quote unquote monster or whatever kind of evil, malignant force that's antagonizing your characters to use it sparingly. So either kind of prick and prod now and then, or make it very harsh and lasting, but don't try anything in the middle of that because basically you're going to overuse it. And I think a lot of creepypasta falls into this danger of there's this thing affecting me, and I keep like confronting it, and then I leave, and then it confronts me again. And by that time, I think a lot of readers, kind of like in a horror movie, if you keep seeing the monster, you're then used to it, and it's no longer scary.
yeah,
And you have to be very, very careful, even if it's just words on a page. If you give adequate description to something, uh, the reader can't really be scared because they've made up the image in their head and they're probably imagining ways to defeat it, even if your protagonist can't. And it's just this story again has really good restraint and it knows how to balance things. So I've been trying to emulate that ever since.
yeah. I know what I mean. So I mean, I often find the hardest thing is almost not giving the reader an opportunity to poke any holes in what you're saying,
Hmm.
almost because like horror is by its nature kind of I say unrealistic, but if not in you understand what I mean. In that
Yeah,
you're not going to get hunted by a satanic cult from the woods. Chances are, but
and yeah, that's the difficulty. If you are, if you're going to use a satanic cult, you better make it convincing that that's what this protagonist thinks and that's what the reader can relate to, which is why, as you said before, it's very useful to use oh, I was a child when this happened, because then the reader can kind of suspend their disbelief of, oh, well, this didn't happen, but maybe this kid remembers it this way. And there's a nice connection there of you're kind of guessing, well, is the kid crazy, or is this exactly how it happened? And oh, this poor child, they're very confused. And it's kind of a nice way to get around the fact that, oh, yes, you're using a monster, but if the kid's fear is written well, and it's
yeah,
something that an audience can remember of their own fears, then that's effective horror. Convincing someone of the impossible is the hardest thing to do. But if you can do it well, I mean, you can sell them on anything essentially.
yeah. So, so with the story, I mean, is there anything that you don't like about it, or anything that you think isn't done as well as you think it could have been?
I think it could be shorter. I don't know exactly what I would take out. Probably just a couple, some sentences here and there in every paragraph, just to make it a bit more concise. But that's I that's largely a nitpick, and it's very possible if those portions were removed, then it wouldn't be the same. For me, this is kind of the bar for effective, at least longer form online horror fiction, because it's got a good build up. It's great at setting a scene. It doesn't overstep its boundaries, and it leaves a last on me, and I think a lot of people. Um, if it was a shorter story, the rules are different, of course. But this, yeah, for me, there's not much really to not like about it. It's certainly a type of story that's not going to work for everybody. A lot of people want a monster, they want a stalker, which is fine. It's just this. There's an art to this, and I think that this story exemplifies how to best use that art.
Yeah, definitely. I know. Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, and yeah, to be honest, I totally agree with it. Agree with you on that one. I'd say it's as I said before, it is one of my favourites, and ever since I read it, I've been I was obsessed with it for a good couple of weeks. I think like read that about 4 times. I loved it.
It's wonderful.
Right. So in which case we move on to the third part, and again you're one of the people who I've been very excited to sort of get onto this part with, especially because your work on with on the hyper realist with Slime Beast and Dead Palette, which I've been
Oh
listening
yes.
to, and is great fun. So creepypasta in general. So I mean to start off with the specifics. I mean, what would you say, in your opinion, makes a good creepypasta?
It's hard to say anymore because creepypasta has just changed so much from its inception, and it's like it's experiencing the natural life and death cycle of a fad or a trend or whatever, yeah, where it starts very, kind of innocuously, and then it explodes, and there's this wonderful kind of golden age of these great creepypastas being written, and then too many people get a hold of it, and there's not enough regulations, but there's not enough, I guess, rules about it. There's not enough quality control, so it just becomes too much, and it gets watered down. Then it hits game, and then it goes back underground, and you can apply that formula to everything that's ever happened. And
Yeah.
then who knows? It may undergo a renaissance sometime soon. Who knows? But for me, even outside of literature, which creepypasta has influenced web series and movies and songs and all artwork and all sorts of stuff, I would say the real spirit of creepypasta is something that is unnerving. Could be creepy, could be scary, could be tragic, could be dark. It is just unnerving. It is eye catching. And it is typically short in duration or just, very small in scope, but it's pungent enough that it leaves a lasting impression on somebody. and more often than not, it is passed around the internet, and that's how people catch wind of it. And I think the best creepypastas are the ones whose names you still remember, like Tulpa, the Russian sleep experiment for all of its faults, Pen Pal, of course. Just these things that people consume, and the actual consumption is a very small amount of time, but it leaves a lasting impression. Something like Game of Thrones, which is its own beast, of course, is very popular, but it's still going. And for me, there's certain creepypastas that have that same effect, but it's just one small story. And I love that about creepypasta, or just, whatever creepypasta is turning into in general. I think that, to me, is what creepypasta is. It's that video that you can't get out of your head. It's that sound that unnerves you. It's that image that you share around and you're used to it by now, but you still remember how it affected you in the first place. Or it's, a wonderful story that you love to refer back to and measure other literature against. I think it's just, mimetic, as Dead Palette would say, mimetic, uh, slightly realist horror that's relatable. As
Yeah.
far as where, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I know. Well, I mean, I was just going to say sort of like, especially, I mean, without being too sort of like, oh, I remember the old days about the whole thing. But I mean, with as you say, these sort of iconic pastas, it's not. I mean, none of them are like necessarily perfect by any means, but it's just sort of like that emotional response that you got from them. I think that I really
Hmm.
that really stuck with me. As I say, 'cause, I mean, was it? It's either Ben Drowned or Pen Pal. That was probably one of the first I ever read, and what got me into the whole thing. And just to this day, I will read opinion pieces on it. I'll sit down. Anything anyone's got to think about it, I'll read it just because I remember how it made me feel that first time.
And it's fascinating to look at each of the quote unquote classics, because yeah, none of them are perfect by any means, but they are all very, very distinct, and they have their own identity that I think has been born through how they affected people. So Tulpa is very psychological, very almost clinical in a way,
Yeah.
until it devolves into just this, dark, dark thing that's happening to you. That's very different from, say, Mr. Widemouth, which is just sinister. It's very, very dark and sinister, and it's a completely different story. But like, I would hold those two up at the same level.
Yeah.
What's another one? Russian Sleep Experiment. That's a historical fiction dark piece, but God, man, like, no one forgets that one. Even if you don't like it, you never forget that one. And there's things to be praised about it. So I think that's something that we don't really have anymore as far as in the mainstream of creepypasta out right now, that quite affects people the same way that these earlier classics did. And it's not because people can't write anymore. It's not because, these talented authors, well, I'm sure some of them have left, but there aren't equally talented authors out there. It's just how people prioritize the subgenre now, and how things are handled has really taken away the impetus for someone to be unique and impactful. There's a lot of there's so much uploaded for all the quality control. There's so much uploaded and so much that's read, that any potentially the next pen pal is kind of lost in the shuffle, which is insurmountable. I mean, there's just, if it gets too big, it's too big. You can't really do anything about that until it goes back underground. Um, which I we talked about this in the hyper realist, but I think a good idea is to have different outlets with different priorities. On Too Spooky, of course, we have our own objectives and priorities. The Creepypasta Wikia has different objectives from No Sleep, which has different objectives than creepypasta.com. And I think it's good that we have all these, because for all their faults, there's different people who envision something of creepypasta that's their own take on it. And that's just how it's going to have to survive for a while. It's going to get the mainstream treatment. It's already got shows on the Sci-Fi Channel. It's had terrible movies. Um, we will see what happens to creepypasta and what its future is. I think one of the best things we can do is just encourage authors to write as well as possible, to think outside the box, and to try to, you know, get back to what made it a classic, which of course everyone wants to reinvent the wheel. But yeah, just try to on people that creepypasta in its, I guess, its heyday used to have. Hello.
Hello, sorry. uh,
Okay.
we got that's it. We got to creepypasta in its heyday, and you cut out.
Oh shit. Yeah, sorry. Where was I? Oh yeah. So try to get back to creepypasta in its heyday and just the effect it had on people, as opposed to, people kind of just treat creepypasta as, oh, I'm gonna write a horror story online, and that could be like a mini novel for all we know. That could be who knows what. But yeah, just try to get back to what made creepypasta impactful.
Nice. And in terms of sort of making it impactful, I mean, how much do you think originality sort of plays into it? 'Cause obviously, I mean, not just creepypasta, but horror in general is kind of sort of there's a lot of tropes involved, things like that, and
Oh,
especially. But I mean, how big a role do you feel that originality plays in creating a good creepypasta?
um, I would say a very large role. And that can come from originality, can come from a few different places. Tulpa, for if we go back to that one, is it's just about someone making up an imaginary friend on accident, and none of that's that's not new, but the way it's presented is very new, as kind of a hey, here's a how-to guide on to make your tulpa, which is a very kind of modern age self-help thing. And a lot of creepypasta is born from just current inventions and current apps and current trends. So anything that's happening in the world today, even if you hate it, it's something that can be used because there's always new stuff being created and affecting people. And if you can adapt that into a horror kind of framework, then you can be somewhat new and original. And it's things that people don't understand, things that are new, things that people don't have a lot of control over yet, and exploring where that can be scary and how that can affect people. So whether it's, a new video game that comes out, or a new piece of technology, or a new social trend, anything can be made into a horror story. And the nice thing about creepypasta is that it basically says, hey, everyone, remember this, or have you heard about this? Well, let me tell you, everything is not as it seems. And that sounds kind of tropey in and of itself, but that's what horror is. It's
Hmm.
taking something and then making it unknown. And the fear of the unknown, as our, good friend Mr. Lovecraft said, is the oldest and most powerful fear of mankind. It's fear of what we don't understand. So I think it all kind of stems from just treating, even if it's, modern life, just treating things that scare us and then giving them this internet treatment, I think.
Nice. So of course, that's kind of leads on to sort of the big question. Of course, is what do you think of the creepypasta scene at the moment? Then
Oh God.
I know, it's my favourite question to ask everyone because it
it's
nearly
it's
always
such
provokes that reaction. Just
Well, it's one of those things where you're like, I could complain for 3 hours about how bullshit it is right now, but there's always anyone who cares about creepypasta is doing something to bring some good out of it and do some good for the community, I think. So let's just start with the bad. Obviously, as I was discussing, there's not a lot of standout stories being written anymore, and there's not a lot of encouragement for it. And I think that is mostly the fault of overzealous moderators on certain sites, and the proliferation um, of narrators who are kind of just the focus is to go listen to someone read something, not write your own thing. The idea of true scary stories kind of taking the importance of fiction writing and just trying to be as edgy as possible. There's a lot of different factors that are kind of contributing to the decline. And as I said, this is an inevitable decline. Everything goes through this life cycle. Um, and it's just for people who do care about it and people who want to continue seeing it thrive in some way, in some format, you have to do things like a lot of us have done. Have your own site where you encourage people to post and to review stories, have writing contests that encourage good story writing, support authors and both existing and aspiring ones, and just hear them out, give them honest criticism, even if it's bad, even if it's negative, and just fight the good fight, I guess, for lack of a better term. That's kind of where creepypasta is at. It's gonna get a lot bigger. It's gonna get a lot more watered down. We're gonna see even more movie and TV adaptations, I'm pretty sure. And it's gonna give a lot of people the wrong idea of what exactly it is, but that's okay. If you love something and you're a part of something, you accept the fact that people are not going to get it. You will accept the fact that people will try to do something with it that's the antithesis to what it was based on. So you just, you keep what you can and you try to grow that. You reach out to others who share your priorities and also want to see it thrive. And, you be patient. That's about it.
That's cool. So I mean, so if you've got someone who's wanting to is wanting to pick up their laptop or pen or whatever and start writing their own
Mhm.
creepypasta, and I suppose it's kind of a two-part question. But I mean, what advice would you give someone who's just starting out? And if they're like, well, I want to make sure I want to write good creepypasta, who would you suggest that they check out to draw their influences from?
There's got to be like a book or a primer on creepypasta that, I don't know, I may suggest this to be written because this would be really nice to just kind of give someone a link and say, hey, read this. This is your syllabus for what required reading you need to do and sites you need to visit. But I would say go to the wiki, and I'm sure there's a section for like the classics or whatever. Read the more famous ones, the older, more famous ones. That will give you a good both history lesson and kind of introduction into what is an effective creepypasta. After you've read those and gotten an idea for the different subgenres and tropes that there are, which ones do you like? Why do you like them? Think critically about that, and then start writing. Post to the wiki has a workshop, like a writer's workshop, in a critique section. I'd say post them there, and then I always say we have a really good writer circle at toospooky.com on the Discord. We also have a critique section. We're very, very open to new people, and we want to help them grow as writers. So I would say write your stuff after you know a little bit of what creepypasta is. Get it in front of people. Understand that your first work is more than likely not going to be great. And if someone does say it's really great, put it in front of somebody else because they may not know. They may not know what is good horror fiction, and it's very important to try to get as many eyes on it as possible because there's such a steep learning curve, and I'm very much a novice at this still of writing effective horror fiction. So just use the shotgun approach. Get out to as many outlets as possible. Really study it up if you want to make good writing.
Nice. That's actually being that was my last question. That's actually quite an uplifting note to end on. Thanks for that.
Yeah. For the sarcastic dickbag that I make myself out to be, there's a lot of positivity in what I've learned from this community.
Oh, definitely. And as I say, and I agree with you. I think it has a lot of bad points, but I think it's here now, and I think it will be here for a long time coming, for better or worse.
Yeah.
No worries. Well,
and yeah, don't be afraid to say when something's bad either. There's going to be people who won't listen to you or call you a hater or whatever. It's happened to me plenty of times, but don't be afraid to say, no, this is bullshit and this is hurting the overall art form and I don't like what this person's doing. Be respectful. Just, understand that your constructive criticism will not always be met well, but if you're giving it, it's because you care. That'd probably be my final words.
Nice. Well, I'd say thanks a lot. I'd say I've really enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for your thoughts on everything.
Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy. about this, and I think podcasts like yours are great because this is often very informative and helpful to people who just don't know, and there's a lot to learn. So this it's a good thing what you're doing here.
Oh, thanks. You're going to make me blush. But yeah, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. So there we have it. That was my interview with Abysmii. Thanks again to Abysmii for taking part in that. Embarrassingly, I totally forgot to ask him if he wanted to plug anything. So obviously, if you like the way he sounds or the story that he's written, or anything else that he's talked about, check him out. I mean, his music you can find at Abysmii, Raw Dog readings on YouTube for for horror, and Ray Gun readers on YouTube as well for his science fiction critiques. All of which I'm going to link in the description. So anyway, that's it for now. I hope you all had a good one with that one. I certainly had a lot of fun, and I will see you guys next time.